Last summer, I decided to take a solo trip to Oregon. I'd been working double shifts at the hospital for months, and the burnout was getting to me. As a night shift nurse, my sleep schedule was completely messed up anyway, so I figured a change of scenery might help reset my internal clock. I found this charming little cottage on Airbnb about 30 minutes outside Portland. The photos showed a quaint wooden house surrounded by tall pine trees, with a spacious backyard that backed up to a dense forest. The host, Margaret, had stellar reviews and the price was reasonable for a week-long stay. When I arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, Margaret greeted me personally. She was probably in her 70s with silver hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. She showed me around the cottage, which was even more beautiful in person. The living room had a stone fireplace. The kitchen was fully stocked, and the bedroom had large windows that looked out onto the backyard. Margaret mentioned that she lived in the main house about a quarter-mile away and that I should call if I needed anything. The first night was perfect. I made dinner, read a book by the fireplace, and went to bed around 11. But around 2 in the morning, I woke up needing water. My throat was parched from the dry mountain air. As I walked to the kitchen, I glanced out the bedroom window and froze. There was someone standing in the backyard. It was a man, I think, though it was hard to tell in the darkness. He was just standing there, perfectly still, about 50 feet from the house. He appeared to be facing the cottage, but I couldn't make out any features. My heart started pounding, but I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was Margaret's husband checking on something, or a neighbor who'd gotten lost. I watched for about 5 minutes, but the figure didn't move an inch. Eventually, I convinced myself I was imagining things and went back to bed. The next morning, I checked the backyard. There were no footprints in the soft earth where I'd seen the figure, which made me feel a little better. I spent the day hiking and exploring the area, trying to shake off the unease from the night before. But that night, around the same time, I saw him again. This time, I was more alert. Having gone to bed later after watching a movie, I crept to the window and peered through the curtains. The figure was in the exact same spot, standing motionless. I grabbed my phone and tried to take a picture, but the camera couldn't pick up anything in the darkness. I watched for 20 minutes this time, and he never moved. Not even a slight shift in posture. I barely slept the rest of the night, checking the window every hour. By morning, I was exhausted and on edge. I called Margaret and asked if she or anyone else had reason to be in the backyard at night. She seemed genuinely confused and assured me that no one should be on the property after dark. She offered to come check things out, but I felt embarrassed and told her it was probably just shadows playing tricks on me. The third night, I decided to stay awake and watch. I made coffee and positioned myself by the window with a clear view of the backyard. Around 1:45 a.m., movement caught my eye. The figure was walking slowly from the tree line toward his usual spot. In the moonlight, I could see it was definitely a man, tall and thin, wearing what looked like dark clothing. He reached a spot and then just stopped, like he was a statue. I watched him for 3 hours. He never moved, never shifted weight, never turned his head. At exactly 5 a.m., he walked back into the forest and disappeared. The whole thing felt ritualistic, like he was performing some kind of ceremony I couldn't understand. By the fourth night, I was a wreck. I'd barely eaten, barely slept, and I was jumping at every sound. But I had to know what was happening. I decided to go outside and confront him. I know it sounds crazy, but the not knowing was driving me insane. I waited until he appeared and took his position. Then I grabbed a flashlight and slowly opened the back door. The night air was cold and smelled of pine and damp earth. I stepped onto the back porch and called out, "Hey, who are you? What are you doing out there?" The figure didn't respond. I took a few steps closer and shined my flashlight in his direction. That's when I saw something that made my blood turn to ice. Where his face should have been, there was nothing. Just smooth, pale skin. No eyes, no nose, no mouth. Just blank. I stumbled backward, nearly falling off the porch. When I looked again, he was gone, vanished. I ran inside and locked every door and window, then called Margaret immediately despite the early hour. She arrived within 20 minutes, bringing her husband Tom with her. I told them everything, expecting them to think I was crazy. But Margaret's face went pale, and she exchanged a worried look with Tom. "We should have told you," she said quietly. There have been reports. Other guests have seen him too. We thought maybe if we didn't mention it, he'd go away. Tom explained that the figure had been appearing for about 2 years, always in the same spot, always at the same time. Previous guests had described exactly what I'd seen, including the faceless detail. They'd contacted police, but there was never any evidence of trespassing, and officers who'd staked out the property never saw anything. We don't rent the cottage much anymore, Margaret admitted. Most people leave after the second night. I packed up that morning and left. Margaret didn't charge me for the remaining days, and she seemed genuinely sorry. Before I drove away, she mentioned something that still haunts me. The strange thing is, she said, that spot where he stands. That's where we found the previous owner when we bought the property 15 years ago. He'd been missing for weeks. Heart attack, they said. But he'd been dead so long, his face was, well, it wasn't there anymore. I never found out what happened to the land or why this man keeps returning to that same spot every night. I just know I'll never book another remote Airbnb again, and I always check the property's history before I stay anywhere now. I work in real estate photography, which means I travel constantly to different cities for shoots. The work pays well, but the irregular schedule and constant travel can be exhausting. I prefer Airbnb over hotels because I can spread out my equipment and work on editing photos in a more comfortable environment. Plus, the kitchens let me save money by cooking instead of eating out for every meal. In March, I booked a downtown loft in Chicago for a 4-day shoot. The listing showed a modern, minimalist space with an open floor plan, exposed brick walls, and large windows overlooking the city. The host, Jerry, had great reviews and responded quickly to my questions about bringing professional equipment. I arrived on a Sunday evening after a long day of flights and delays. The loft was exactly as advertised, sleek and spacious with hardwood floors and contemporary furniture. The living area had a black leather sectional sofa arranged in an L shape around a glass coffee table, with a large flat-screen TV mounted on the brick wall. The dining area featured a rectangular wooden table with 4 chairs positioned neatly around it. Everything was perfectly organized and staged, which I appreciated as someone who works in visual media. After unpacking my cameras and lighting equipment, I arranged everything carefully in the corner of the living room. I'm particular about my setup because some of my lenses are worth more than most people's cars, and I need easy access to different pieces depending on the shoot requirements. I positioned my camera bags in a specific order, set up my laptop charging station on the dining table, and organized my memory cards and batteries on the kitchen counter. The first night, I worked late editing photos from a previous shoot, finally going to bed around 2 a.m. I'm used to working odd hours, so this wasn't unusual for me. I sleep heavily when I'm tired, especially after travel days. When I woke up Tuesday morning, something felt off immediately. The light was coming through the windows at a different angle than I remembered. As I walked to the kitchen to make coffee, I realized why everything looked strange. The furniture had been moved. The sectional sofa was no longer in an L shape. Instead, it had been rearranged into a straight line against the opposite wall. The coffee table was now positioned at an angle in the center of the room. Most disturbing, the dining table had been moved to where the sofa used to be, and all 4 chairs were arranged in a perfect circle around it, like they were set up for a séance or meeting. My first thought was that I was misremembering the layout. I'd been tired when I arrived, and maybe I wasn't paying as much attention as I thought. But when I checked my equipment, I knew something was wrong. My camera bags had been moved from their carefully organized positions. They weren't damaged or opened, just relocated. My laptop was still on the dining table, but the table itself was in a completely different spot. I called Jerry, the host, and asked if he'd entered the apartment for any reason. He seemed confused and assured me that he hadn't been there since before my arrival. He asked if anything was missing, and when I confirmed everything was accounted for, he suggested maybe I'd moved things without realizing it. The explanation felt weak, but I didn't have a better one. I spent Tuesday shooting at various locations around the city. The work went well, and I tried to put the furniture incident out of my mind. When I returned that evening, everything was exactly as I'd left it that morning. I made dinner, worked on editing, and went to bed around midnight making sure to take mental notes of where everything was positioned. Wednesday morning, it happened again. This time, the changes were more dramatic. The entire living room had been rearranged into what looked like a classroom setup. The sofa had been pushed against the wall, and the dining chairs were arranged in neat rows facing the TV. The coffee table was positioned at the front like a teacher's desk. Even stranger, my camera equipment had been moved again, this time arranged in a display pattern on the kitchen counter, like someone was showing off the gear. I was starting to feel genuinely unsettled. I took photos of the apartment with my phone to document the changes, then called Jerry again. This time, he sounded more concerned and offered to come check the locks and security. He arrived within an hour, and we went through the entire loft together. All the locks were functioning properly, the windows were secure, and there were no signs of forced entry. Jerry was as puzzled as I was. "I've been hosting for 3 years," he said, "and I've never had anything like this happen. Are you sure you're not sleepwalking or something?" I'd never been a sleepwalker, but I was starting to doubt my own sanity. That night, I decided to stay awake and see if I could catch whatever was happening. I positioned myself on the relocated sofa with a clear view of the entire loft and waited. Around 3 a.m. I must have dozed off despite my best efforts. When I jerked awake about an hour later, I was no longer on the sofa. I was sitting in one of the dining chairs, which had been moved to the center of the room. The other 3 chairs were arranged around me in a circle, and I was facing the kitchen where my camera equipment had been arranged in a complex pattern that almost looked like symbols. I jumped up, heart racing, and immediately started taking photos of everything. The arrangement was too deliberate to be random, too complex to be the result of sleepwalking. Someone or something was deliberately moving things while I slept, and now it was moving me too. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. I sat in the kitchen with all the lights on, clutching my phone and jumping at every small sound. When morning came, I started packing immediately. I called Jerry and explained that I needed to leave early, that something was seriously wrong with the apartment. He offered to refund part of my stay and seemed genuinely concerned for my well-being. But as I was loading my equipment into my rental car, he mentioned something that made my skin crawl. "You know, you're the 3rd guest this year who's had strange experiences here." The other 2 also mentioned furniture moving on its own. I keep meaning to look into the building's history, but I've been too busy with other properties. I asked him why he hadn't mentioned this earlier, and he looked embarrassed. I thought maybe they were just trying to get refunds or something. But after what you've described, I'm starting to think there might be something to it. The building used to be a psychiatric hospital back in the 1960s. This unit was converted from what used to be a group therapy room. That explained the circular chair arrangements and the classroom setup. Someone or something was still trying to conduct sessions in that space. I left Chicago that morning instead of staying for my final day of shooting. I've never experienced anything like it before or since, but I always research the history of buildings before booking now. Some places hold on to their past in ways that are impossible to explain. I'm a freelance graphic designer, and most of my income comes from short-term contracts that require me to travel to different cities. The work is inconsistent, so I'm always looking for ways to save money on accommodations. Airbnb has been a godsend for finding affordable places to stay, especially for longer projects that can last several weeks. In November, I landed a great contract with a startup in Austin. They needed a complete rebrand, including logo design, website mock-ups, and marketing materials. The project was estimated to take 3 weeks, and they were paying well enough that I could afford to be picky about where I stayed. I found a charming Victorian house in East Austin that had been converted into separate units. The listing showed a cozy 1-bedroom apartment with original hardwood floors, vintage furniture, and lots of character. The host, Linda, had dozens of 5-star reviews praising her hospitality and the apartment's unique charm. The photos showed built-in bookshelves filled with old novels, antique furniture, and lace curtains that gave the place a homey, nostalgic feel. I booked 3 weeks and arrived on a Monday afternoon in late November. Linda met me at the property, a kind woman in her 60s who clearly took pride in maintaining the historical character of the building. She explained that the house was built in 1892 and had been in her family for 2 generations. She'd converted it to rental units after her husband passed away, both for income and to keep the house from feeling too empty. The apartment was even more charming in person. The bedroom had a beautiful antique 4-poster bed with a quilted comforter, and the living room featured a vintage writing desk that would be perfect for my work. Linda had stocked the kitchen with coffee, tea, and some basic groceries, which was a thoughtful touch I hadn't expected. After Linda left, I unpacked my laptop and design equipment, then settled in for the evening. I was tired from traveling and decided to order takeout rather than cook. While waiting for my food to arrive, I connected to the Wi-Fi and noticed something odd. The network name was Victorian Secrets, which seemed appropriate, but when I opened my laptop, there was already a message waiting in my email drafts folder. It wasn't addressed to anyone, and I hadn't written it. The message simply said, "Check the guest book, page 47, don't ignore this." I assumed it was some kind of technical glitch. Maybe a previous guest had used the Wi-Fi, and somehow their email got mixed up with mine. I deleted the message and didn't think much more about it. The next morning, I started working on the rebrand project. The client wanted something modern, but with vintage touches, which was perfect given my surroundings. I brought several design books for inspiration, and I spread them out on the antique writing desk along with my sketches and notes. Around lunchtime, I decided to take a break and explore the apartment more thoroughly. In the living room, I found a leather-bound guest book sitting on one of the built-in shelves. It was thick and well-worn, with entries dating back several years. Most of the comments were typical vacation rental reviews praising Linda's hospitality and the apartment's charm. I flipped through the pages out of curiosity, and when I reached page 47, I found something that made my hands shake. There was an entry dated just 2 weeks before my arrival, written in shaky handwriting. "To whoever stays here next, leave immediately. Don't stay past the second night. She comes back looking for her things. Check the bedroom closet. You'll find them hidden behind the false wall. She gets angry when people touch her belongings." I'm writing this on my last night because I can't take it anymore. The scratching in the walls, the cold spots, the way the furniture moves by itself. But worst of all is when she stands at the foot of the bed watching you sleep. I pretended not to see her the first few times, but last night she got closer. I could smell her perfume, something old and floral. Please don't ignore this warning like I wish I had ignored the message from the guest before me. Her name was Catherine, and she died in this room in 1923. Linda doesn't know, or she's pretending not to know. Get out. The entry was signed Marcus R. and included a phone number. My rational mind tried to dismiss it as a prank or someone with mental health issues, but something about the desperate tone of the writing felt genuine. I called the number, and after several rings, a man answered. "Hello? Hi, is this Marcus? I'm staying at the Victorian house in East Austin, and I found your message in the guest book." There was a long pause. "You're still there? Why didn't you leave?" "I just found the message today. Is this real?" "Did you really experience what you wrote about?" Marcus's voice was tired and strained. "I stayed 4 nights. I should have left after the first night when I felt someone sit on the bed next to me. By the 4th night, she was standing so close I could see the details of her face. She was young, maybe early 20s, with dark hair and the saddest eyes I've ever seen. She wore a white nightgown that looked like it was from the 1920s. I felt a chill run down my spine. "What did you do?" "I left at sunrise and never looked back." I tried to warn Linda, but she just said the house had a lot of history and that some guests were more sensitive to it than others. She offered me a partial refund and asked me not to write about it in online reviews. After ending the call, I sat in the living room trying to decide what to do. I had a 3-week contract and couldn't afford to book alternative accommodations. Plus, part of me was curious about the closet Marcus had mentioned. The bedroom closet was a large walk-in space with built-in shelving and hanging rods. I examined the walls carefully and found what Marcus was talking about. The back wall sounded hollow when I tapped it, and I could see faint lines where a section had been cut and fitted back into place. Using a kitchen knife, I carefully pried at the edges until a rectangular section came loose. Behind it was a hidden compartment containing a small collection of items: a silver hand mirror, a pearl necklace, several letters tied with ribbon, and a photograph of a young woman who matched Marcus's description. The back of the photo was inscribed, Catherine Morrison, 1923. That night I barely slept. Every sound seemed amplified, every shadow looked like a person. Around 3 a.m. I felt the temperature in the room drop dramatically. I pulled the covers over my head and tried to ignore the sound of footsteps pacing back and forth at the foot of the bed. The next morning I called Linda and asked about Catherine Morrison. Linda was quiet for a long time before admitting that Catherine had been a previous tenant who died in the apartment during the Spanish flu pandemic. She'd been young and engaged to be married when she fell ill. I thought if I put her things away, she might rest peacefully, Linda said. But some guests seemed to disturb her somehow. I should have told you, but I was hoping this time would be different. I packed my things and left that afternoon. Linda refunded my money without argument and seemed relieved that I was handling the situation calmly. Before I left, I put Catherine's belongings back in their hiding place and left a note in the guest book warning the next guest, just as Marcus had done for me. Sometimes I wonder if that chain of warnings is still continuing, if future guests are still finding desperate messages from the people who stayed before them. I learned later that Linda sold the property 6 months after my stay. The new owners converted it back to a single-family home, and I hope that gave Catherine the peace she was looking for.